I wanted to spark a conversation with everybody about content with regard to its safety for different populations and how we trust content. And I think Jennifer Puckett is really positioned to help us with this because she's been working in online communities for over 20 years. And all she does is help build communities around safe content. But how do you define safe content? And how do we as consumers delineate between what we're consuming that is not offensive and offensive, and what do you find offensive? And if you're an organization or a business, how do you make decisions and on what timeline? Because sometimes you have a message out there and you want to put it out there, and it turns out that how you do it is quite offensive to some people. So this is not a conversation that is going to have one thread. I think this is going to bring up a lot of issues for all of us, and I'm really excited to have it be in the context of Jennifer's expertise, because she is somebody who actually moderates content, and she does it in the way an expert would, which is says, okay, who's going to be consuming this, and what's its reach, and can we anticipate its reach? Because we all know that social media just goes like wildfire, literally, and once something's out there, it's really out there. So we're also talking about very large communities. So I want to kick off this conversation just to understand what Jennifer does, and then perhaps all of us can come in and ask questions and just discuss, how we relate to this question. Jennifer, thank you for being on Swell. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And I guess from the perspective of putting out fires, I'm sure you've been in a position where something happened and you're trying to make it go away or fix it, and you're in like defense mode. But I want to talk about the offense mode first. How do you set companies up for risk control so that they don't put content out there that's not appropriate?
Thank you, Deborah, so much for having me on Swell today for this really important conversation. I really, really appreciate it. Just a really quick one to get out of the way. A couple of things. Number one, I go by she, her, just for the audience out there, and my last name is pronounced Puckett. You made me sound so posh with Puckett. Anyway, so on to your question. Really good question, by the way, and something that we see a lot in this industry, or I have over the last 20 years, which is that unfortunately a lot of companies get so excited about presenting what they have, marketing out what they have to offer, that they sometimes forget that there is a second half to that presentation, which is that you're sending it out to the public, and then the public are going to respond. And how they respond is not always necessarily something that people really, really fully think through. So what we do at Strawberry Social, and what we have done over the last 20 years working with both of our clients and working directly with brands, is that we have set up our companies ahead of time. Before anything goes live, we work with them to set up their crisis strategies. Now, that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean making sure that they have live moderation, constant moderation of the content that is coming in from social media. It can also mean just checking filters and ensuring that the technology that we have available will filter out any kind of obvious nefarious content, right? So your obvious hate speech, your obvious foul language that you don't want to have available. But what we also do is set up a crisis strategy with the internal teams. And by that we mean we go through and pick out what I like to try to say is the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So what you want to have ahead of time is your team. So we can't think of everything that's going to happen. We don't always necessarily even know what's going to be offensive to whom when we put things out. We can certainly spend some time, and I highly recommend that companies do spend time with their trust and safety teams to say, here's what we want to do. What do you think? How can we possibly look at this from all angles and prevent a potential crisis. And when that doesn't happen, or when we don't think of everything, because we won't, you want to make sure you have your team in place to handle as swiftly as possible what could come down the line. And that could be all sorts of things. You want to have your who. So who's going to be on the ground floor, aware of the fact that this is going out? Who do they then report to internally when something does happen? When the other team takes it in, whether it's PR, marketing, legal, executives, even a global security department, if necessary, making sure that everybody is aware of who is on that chain of command to tackle the situation as best as possible. And again, this is something that you want to make sure everybody's aware of what their tasks are that are involved. Does the CEO need to draft something immediately to put out to their audience as an apology? Does it need to be an explanation? Do we need them to be quiet for the time being? Is it something that the Global Security Investigations Department needs to get onto and talk to authorities about? I know these aren't necessarily the conversations that people like to have, but the more you have in place ahead of time, the less stressed and panicked we find people will be when the inevitable stuff does come out. Yeah.
Jennifer, thanks so much for being here, and thank you for your response. And you made a really interesting comment about building teams. And can you talk a little bit about how you advise people to build teams? Because we're talking about different levels, different hierarchical positions where some people are doing more social posts, other people are doing more formalized missives that are, in the form of releases or reports. But they all have to adhere to some kind of idea or guideline that is similar to like a brand guideline, but it's for content. And can you give an example of how you have helped a company in this process? Because I think it's still abstract for a lot of people to understand, because people listening might have a small business, they might have a university, they might have a community group, they might be a startup, but everybody wants to do things right. So let's talk about team building and who you bring on and what your questions are before you hire somebody who's going to be speaking on your behalf. And also, is there such a thing as like a brand guideline, but for language use around these exchanges? And let me know if this question is not clear, and make it clear, because I'm sure you're saying what you really need to ask is blank. But I think you might be getting at sort of my question around, like, how do you formalize this so that company wide it is easier to adopt?
Hey, Deborah, thank you. Yeah, you asked some really, really great, tough questions here, which is good because it's forcing me to think back. And I have to say that when it comes to asking the questions about setting up teams, the first thing that we usually do, or what I do with the organizations I work with, is to take a step backwards and look at asking the types of questions that are kind of sometimes difficult and no one really wants to think about, which is to get into the dirt and just ask the question, what are my biggest concerns for my brand? And that can even be real world concerns. In fact, in many cases, it should be. So first you want to ask yourself those questions. What is it that I am afraid might happen with my brand in a social space? And write down all of your concerns. And from there, then you can start to build and craft, like, all right, so if this situation happens, normally, who would I go to? Who do I want to have to go to? Who do I feel needs to be involved? So again, for that small business where it's just a company of one, right? You may be the only one handling everything. Or if you're dealing with a third-party vendor, you might want to make sure that they are aware that if these such particular crises or situations take place, which you have very thoughtfully written out, they are to contact you straight away. And then when you get them, you will have your team set up on who handles what. If it's a legal situation, you want to make sure you have your lawyer on speed dial. If it is a health and safety issue, of, let's say you're a food brand, then you're going to want to have health and safety on speed dial. If it's a situation where something is really inappropriate on your social page, you're going to want to know who to talk to and how to report that to the social media platform. And of course, if you need to communicate out any kind of information about the company to the public because of the situation, you're going to want to have some templated responses that you feel comfortable working around with and speaking to your audience with. And on that point of communicating directly to your audience, I know a lot of companies have there is concern around getting the messaging right, and I completely understand where they're coming from. It can be very challenging and very intimidating. What I can say more than anything else is be authentic in your messaging. Make sure that that is top and foremost of whatever messaging you're doing, because we're all human. And if we try too hard to separate ourselves from the human side of things, people are going to know straight away, right? So that should be part of your strategy as well. Now, there are other ways and other questions you're going to want to ask yourself. What I find really fun is that we have actually done live conversations and had done live presentations at different conferences around the world, talking about just these different things, setting up that strategy, building out your team, the kind of questions you need to ask yourself when you have your company and you want to make sure that you are set up for potential issues. And we do have some crisis tips at where I work right now at strawberrysocial.com. We will be linking to that shortly. Just a little plug there, but also just something that we want to share with everybody as some tips on how to set up your crisis team internally. And first and foremost, more than anything else, don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask yourself that question. Don't be afraid to ask me that question. I'd love to hear from folks as well. If you have any questions, there's no silly questions here, especially when what you want to do is make sure that your customers feel safe and empowered to enjoy your products in the way intended and in the best way possible.
Jennifer, thank you for this. I want to make sure people have access to that tip sheet around crisis. This specifically is for charities, but it could be probably leveraged in so many different ways. And thank you for just having such expertise around this. I think it feels like there's a minefield in some ways. You know, when you're running these operations, you have to really anticipate like so many steps ahead of yourself. And I think that this worksheet really helps. And I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation as it grows. Thank you so much.